So Joel, everybody's looking forward to your PowerPoint and your presentation. So everybody, Joel Garbon.
Good morning. This is going to be a little different here today. And what I thought would be a good way to go about this is I want to give you a little bit of background on how I got here, and also I think it's maybe philosophical as far as how do we go about thinking about this whole field of breakthrough energy technologies. Because yesterday's talk, you probably got the idea, okay, here's the science guy and involved with the technology, kind of talking a lot of nuts and bolts and a lot of practical things, and it's all good. That's all good, right? But there is another side to this that I think is really important to be aware of, because it's really the foundation of us moving any of this stuff forward. And it ties into a lot of the things that Kimberly was saying yesterday, tied into certain things that Catherine just spoke of here, and I'm going to give my version of that as well. So what I'm going to talk about is the balancing of the left brain stuff and the right brain stuff in thinking about new energy. So in the late 80s and through the early to mid-90s, I was doing a lot of traveling internationally, all over North and South America and some into Europe, but going down to Chile and Brazil pretty frequently consulting. And at that time, I was primarily working in the chemical and pulp and paper industries. And, you know, these are heavy industries. They have a heavy environmental footprint as well that sometimes isn't too pleasant to think about. But on one particular trip, I was flying late at night over the Amazon, and we're up, 30,000 feet, and the whole plane was asleep. And I'm restless, and I'm just looking out the window, and it's dark. But then I could see down there over the Amazon fire, and there were fires all over the place. Now, at that time, remember, there was a lot of publicity given to the fact that the Amazon was being subjected to slash and burn practices to have animal agriculture, right? This was to essentially graze beef on deforested areas. And you probably have heard about that type of thing. And it was, front page on Time magazine, National Geographic had exposés of this, and I was aware of that. I had read those, and I thought, geez, can that really be going on to something as vast as the largest rainforest on the planet? And it just seems so distant and seems so impossible that could really be having a significant impact. But here I am looking down at the Amazon and just seeing fires all over the place. And it just hit me so deeply that this is not good. This is not good. And I was well aware that it seemed like the whole plane was asleep. And I was the only one looking down and seeing what was happening. And I said a prayer, and it essentially went like this: whatever gifts I have, whatever talents I've developed, any connections or anything that I can do, show me how to heal this. And that became a consistent prayer for a number of years. Then there was this day where I got an answer. And I believe we all have personally profound experiences at various times. Call them mystical, call them what you will, but we all have personally profound experiences. And this was one that I had. And essentially, this came later in the 90s, a few years later, after the Amazon experience. And it was this. I heard a voice, very clear, and it said, "You are to help bring a new form of energy to this planet." That startled me. And all I could think to say was, you mean like solar energy? And the voice had this quality to it immediately that was a smile. I don't know how else to describe it, but there was a smile. And the voice said, no, not solar energy, but you'll see. And I just said, okay, I'll do this. And then just this wave of energy, indescribable, but saturated with love. It's the only way I can describe it. Personally profound. And I think that's how, when we do have a revelation of sorts, it is so intensely personal, it's indescribable, and I'm doing a poor job describing it here, but it affected me. Okay, thank you. So that profoundly affected me. Very quickly, things started to happen that I could not have orchestrated myself, but yet somehow the universe was conspiring to bring me into the intersection of other people who already were well underway with researching energy technologies, writing about it, lecturing about it, developing it, however you want to call it. And I had no grounding in energy science at all. I was basically trained in chemistry and in industrial science and all this, but really nothing having to do with anything electronic-based or energy-based and all that. That was really pretty much a new frontier for me. But yet, for some reason, here I am being invited by some of these various luminaries in the new energy field, like Brian O'Leary, who I mentioned yesterday, and Gene Manning, Dr. Stephen Greer for a while, certainly quite a few others. And they were inviting me to collaborate with them, and it was just so strange because it wasn't coming from any real effort that I was making. It was just like, plunk, here you are. So show up. And I had agreed to show up, and then things were just happening. So I wanted to give you that background here because I think in order to really understand where I'm coming from in this message, you have to understand that, yes, I'm a scientist, and I'm going to show me the data and all that. But at the heart, I believe that there is a loving creator, and I believe that we live in a benevolent universe. That flavors everything that I do, period. However we want to think about it, and I honor everybody's paths or wherever everyone is, but that flavors everything that I do. And you've heard it from many of the others. In fact, you heard, if you were in here for Catherine's talk, she spoke very powerfully about the spiritual resources that have been vital for her, not only her own survival, and she means her physical survival. And we've had one-on-one conversations, and she's so amazing in that. But I can reassure you, she meant for her physical survival, but also to be the well of personal energy and personal power to move forward into work that can be very difficult to do. Because to stand in the midst of a lot of kind of a vortex of distorted energy that wants to misdirect, you have to have something flowing into you to have you stand in it and not get sucked into the maelstrom, okay? And so I'm delighted to be in the presence of all of you people and with all of these others who are presenting their stories about how are they navigating these important topics, and to see that there is a common thread. It's that we all recognize that none of us are doing this alone. And it's really not coming from a place of hey, I'm the most important voice in the room or anything like that. It's simply, I'm being called to show up in this particular way right now, and there's an idea to be shared. And something I definitely have learned is that ideas are strengthened as they're shared. And so that's what we're all doing. And today we're going to share some ideas. It's not going to be one way, all right? But I do want to get a few things out as the message that I'm to share with you here today. And then it's going to be open up, and then I'm going to be vitally interested in hearing what you have to say. Okay? How are we doing so far? We all? Okay. So I've looked at this whole thing about, the nuts and bolts and all the things that you could consider left-brained, and the way I characterize this list is, hey, if you're talking about this message of breakthrough energy technologies, there's a certain set of tools that you could call the stuff, all right? So those would include environmental facts, socioeconomic, geopolitical facts, things that you can find written here, and there's resources, and we see it. We see, we're inundated with this stuff here from news media and all that kind of thing. There's energy statistics. I showed some of those yesterday. There's history to refer to on, hey, like who are some of these inventors who are doing some interesting things, and books have been written about them. There's websites you can find all kinds of stuff. There's technology information itself. I presented some of that yesterday, and there's various resources to find out those things. There's been legislative proposals made that can serve as a resource for people to go, how would we actually get this legislated to help move this whole field forward? There's documentary films, there's TV series being planned and all that kind of thing. There's media movement along this whole thing. There's some interesting quotes that sometimes capture people's imagination. There's some very good conferences that provide a lot of information, this being one of them here. And then there's interesting things going on in the world of social media. And on that last one, I want to say something. I personally don't participate in social media. New Energy Movement, my organization, does. We have a Facebook page, but I don't even really interface with that directly. When Catherine said it's important for us to provide a digital diet, that's what I have chosen. I personally don't participate in social media because I need to get away. And so, in fact, my preferred way to communicate with people in this field is to be face-to-face and sharing a meal. That is how I relate. And, for others, they like to be doing all the electronic email and all that kind of thing. But for me, I love people. And I want to be able to sit down and see your face and just get real. Okay? Next would be a phone call. All right? Next would be maybe a text. Last would be an email. I'm always looking for ways to get away from the computer. All right? But that's how I relate. So, yesterday I talked about some of these facts about what's going on, all the stuff, and I'm not even going to spend time on that because I don't want to put any energy into that whole thing about the problems. Let's don't worry about the problems right now. All right, and I showed some statistics. These are things that can be found on the Energy Information Administration site, which is, part of the Department of Energy. And I'm not going to go over that either. I mean, it's just the fact is anyone can find these things. There's nothing magical that I pulled these up. They exist. I'm aware of them. I do follow them. And I think it's important to understand what the landscape is, But the main thing that the statistics say is that we're out of step. We are not aligned with what the media is portraying and what the huge voice out there about, climate change is going to disrupt everything and all that. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But the statistics show that we're wildly out of step with what might be required to curb greenhouse gas emissions. That's the point of those statistics. All right, and this is probably the most poignant of them here is that we see all of the hydrocarbon fuels are projected to continue to escalate significantly in their use, their extraction from the planet, and their combustion as fuels. Okay, so that's kind of the statistics part of that. Then, there's interesting information on all of these various inventor personalities over the years. Some of the names you might find familiar, but there's a long list, and these were these were geniuses who had amazing insights. Interestingly, quite a few of them had said that where they got their information was a download. It came in a dream. Some, like Tesla, said he was having contact, a contact experience. Yes, I'll show that again. Now, I have met several modern-day inventors, and some who have become quite good friends of mine, who say the same thing, that they get a download, they build it, and it works the first time. It's pretty remarkable. But that this is the experience they're having. And I listen very intently because, again, I know that there is some type of higher organizing intelligence that wants to see us thrive and wants us to embrace a new way here and wants us to responsibly use the information that's imparted to us and provide a benefit to our civilization and to our companion species and to the planet itself. And that's quite a responsibility. And some have not really followed through on what was asked, but fortunately the universe provides duplicative effort. So think about a lot of the great inventions we've heard about over time, and how many times were there, we hear about the guy who's given credit, but then we learn that, oh gosh, the exact same research, in fact, the patent was issued almost within minutes of each other, different places in the world, but it ended up being granted to this guy, and then the history books were written, and that was the hero of some type of technology. That happens so commonly. So definitely the universe doesn't roll the dice and put all the leverage on one individual. It's certainly shared. It's good investment moves are made by that organizing intelligence. So that gives me some reason to have a lot of confidence in it. Certainly there are written materials that are available that provide a good capsule of what's going on in this field and understanding the landscape and the implications. And as I tried to point out yesterday, we're all stakeholders in how this thing rolls out, right? Every one of us is impacted by the energy choices that we make. And not just the selection of technology, but how do we employ this, all right? How do we share it? Because the sharing of it is what makes the difference. And whether we just kind of continue to do it the way business is conducted on planet Earth, or maybe we try a different approach. I like to think that we're going to do it in a different way. There's a lot of fascinating books out there, and I'll tell you, if you haven't met Jean Manning yet, who was my co-author on the Breakthrough Power book, take a few minutes to talk to Jean. She's amazing. She spent more of her life dedicated to researching this field and meeting the inventors, interviewing them than anybody. And I'll tell you, she's read more books on this than anyone. She could give you a great list of books to read. There are some websites that I use as resources. Generally, they are compiled by colleagues of mine in this field. New Energy Movement certainly is not the only organization that has this whole field as its focus. There are others. These are three that are really good sources of information. Revolution Green, Integrity Research Institute, which is Dr. Thomas Falone. It's his organization, and PezWiki. We talked about technologies yesterday. There's a laundry list of these. There's all kinds, a huge portfolio of fascinating new technologies. I'm not going to go into any of these, but they're there. I mean, there's a bunch of them. And any one of these could change the whole paradigm, any one of them. And I'm not one who would, pick the winners out of this, and it won't be just one. There'll be several. And one thing that I believe is very clear is that when one gets through the gate and becomes embraced, that's going to open the floodgate, and there's suddenly going to be just a huge number of these things coming through. And it's going to be fast and furious. It's going to be a wild ride, but exciting. This is just such an amazing time to be alive on planet Earth. It really is. I mean, it's just crazy to think about. What would our grandparents have thought of the pace of innovation? It would just been inconceivable. No, you're making that up. What do you mean? There's this little thing here that you can talk to any human being practically on the planet in a second, and you can calculate things. You're full of it. You're lying. But yet we live in those times. It's amazing. In 2007, after consulting with my primary mentor, Brian O'Leary, when he was down in Ecuador, we talked about how might we take an approach to legislate, to get support for breakthrough energy technologies. And Brian inspired me to take this task on. And I wrote a piece of draft legislation called the Energy Innovation Act. Again, had never done anything like this. It's a brand new thing. And so it was in a way, it was just like I wasn't even thinking about it. It was just coming out. And then here it ends up with this piece of draft legislation. And I went with a colleague who was well seasoned in the political landscape and shopped this around in Washington to various senators and congressmen and their staffs, and got a very chilly reception to this whole thing. And there was one particular experience and a comment that was, Joel, you two unknown guys come in here talking about this stuff, these technologies that nobody's heard of. He goes, you guys don't have a constituency. I've got an army of lobbyists coming in here from oil and gas and coal and nuclear, and now there's lobbies from wind and solar and biofuels. They're all coming in here. You guys don't have a constituency. And kind of left it at that. And what he was saying is, where's the check? Where's the campaign checks? And I'll tell you, how many of you have been in your congressman's office in Washington, D.C.? Okay, a few of you. I thought what was so cool about that was that you could actually walk in. You can walk in. It was amazing. I thought, I really like that. I really like that. Now, that doesn't mean that they really care what you have to say. No. All right? But it was neat that you could walk in there, and it's an impressive place and all that kind of thing, but Washington definitely has an aura about it. The ego energy there is so thick. I could feel it. It was kind of weird, but I could feel it. And then that particular day, I was struck with such a feeling of indignation at the fact that when I had discussed the Energy Innovation Act with citizens around our country at conferences like this, and I said, hey, what would you think about if we had a legislation that basically said that for the price of a single latte, that would be what the taxpayer share would be, a cup of coffee, all right? Be like $4 a year, $5 a year. We could fund several $1 billion and dedicate it to these breakthrough energy technologies to move them forward. Every citizen who I talked to said, sign me up. In fact, they were like, here's my $5. I'm like, well, no, it doesn't work like that, but you get the point. there was such enthusiastic embrace for this, and I said, well, I'm going to go to Washington, we're going to talk about this, but I wanted to get the feedback. And so I felt very confident going in that, hey, the public says this is a no-brainer. Of course, the Congress would go, hey, we could do this easy. That is the pizza budget. $2 billion, that's the pizza budget at the Pentagon. Okay, so it's like, this is so easy to do. But then you saw what happened. I mean, it just was like, we're not going to pay attention to you, and you don't have a constituency. Besides, we don't even know what any of these technologies are. Never even heard of them. So, okay, but it's there. Now it exists. It's out there. You can find it on the New Energy Movement website. It's out there. And what I think about it is really serves as a template. There's a piece of legislation that could be used, on any level. It could be a local level, could be an international level, but it's there as a template. And it was a great learning experience on how the money trail works. And then, of course, getting to know Catherine and hearing her deep dive into all that, it's like, okay, yeah. In fact, I'm glad I didn't know what I know. I wouldn't even have gone, all that. But clearly it was something I was called to do. What about the government? Are there any signs of leadership, going on there? Well, within the Department of Energy, there is an agency called ARPA-E, for Advanced Research Projects Agency, Energy. And ARPA rhymes with DARPA, okay, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which basically, DARPA, what they try to do is mine technological potential from various technologies and see how that can be weaponized and essentially, support our military in various ways. And so a lot of that goes into covert black budget programs and all that kind of thing. But that's DARPA. ARPA is essentially using that similar model, but supposedly for disruptive energy technologies. Now, what's very interesting, who would you think they might contact to, get some idea of what's going on in the breakthrough energy field? And any number of these, right? Could be, could be someone like Greer's or me or these other colleagues who I've mentioned too. But, that hasn't happened. But when you actually see the type of technologies that they consider disruptive, it's incremental changes in wind, solar, battery technology for storage. It's all incremental stuff. It's not this truly disruptive breakthrough stuff that we're talking about here. So it's curious. Embrace of cold fusion, you would think. Our own national laboratories, the U.S. Navy, has been one of the stalwarts in looking at this technology and proving that it's real. Yes, yeah. And several national laboratories, like Los Alamos, has been involved in proving that this is real. All right? But yet you would think that, well, then of course an agency like this within the Department of Energy would be all about helping to march cold fusion along, but they haven't. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Contrived, maybe?
Do you think then that this is a false kind of agency?
It uses a mission. It has a mission and uses the language that makes it appear to be broadening the conversation of what is available. But it keeps that conversation truncated to a few select things that really aren't disruptive. They're incremental, and they keep funneling the public funds, because this is becoming very well funded. They've dispersed hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe more than $1 billion now, but it gets funneled into the same places. Large academic institutions, large companies primarily. A few small select companies have gotten some contracts out of this, but it's largely just for these incremental technologies. So, we haven't really seen anything that I get excited about there. The chief science officer at NASA Langley, he's made public comments at conferences, before, that he said the low-energy nuclear reaction, aka cold fusion, is real, and he thinks it has a lot of promise. So again, that's, the government has, certain little places where they're like, hey, this is great stuff, but you don't see any real movement on it. What about in the media? Any signs of leadership? There was a really good expose on 60 Minutes some years ago that I was like, wow, they did a good job on that. Portrayed it fairly. And we've also seen that occasionally there's been mention of cold fusion technology and some mainstream articles in that. So that was fairly encouraging. Certainly on the films and TVs, I mean, Thrive, we're all familiar with Thrive. That's been an amazing way to wake people up. Steve Greer's Sirius movie gave a lot of exposure to that as well. There have been a lot of science fiction movies and even some cartoons that weave in these notions of, oh, here's my 0-point energy converter and all this kind of cool stuff. And it's neat because, again, it's kind of planting those seeds that, hey, Star Trek stuff is possible. And in fact, it's not just possible, it's here. It's just a matter of how do we get it deployed. And then there's also some concepts for some new TV series that are very interesting. And I've spoken to the producers of a couple of these concepts, the Ultimate Energy Showdown, Free Energy Quest. These are a few of the concept names for things like this. So that'd be really cool to see on that. So there's some encouraging signs. Oh, X-Files, huh? Yeah. So very good, very good. As far as, some of these thought-provoking little quotes here, right? So, you don't have to burn every lump of coal. You don't have to take every quart of oil out of the planet either, all right? We can move into a new energy era out of it being a really good idea rather than because we've hit some cataclysmic breaking point, okay? And the time is right to do that, and we're going to do that. We are going to do it. But these things are nice. By the way, the person there in the middle, that's Dr. Eugene Mallove, who was he was the editor of a science periodical at MIT who exposed the fraudulent debunking of cold fusion that occurred within the MIT physics community. Okay, and he resigned in protest from MIT when he found out about that, and started an organization called New Energy Laboratories and Infinite Energy Magazine, which continues to this day. And he was amazing. Eugene Mallove was to be the keynote speaker at the first conference that I hosted for New Energy Movement back in 2004 in Portland. It was in September 2004. Eugene Mallove was murdered in May of 2004. But he did an amazing job, all right?
I wanted to ask, is Levon Keshe's work, is that cold fusion reactor? He's
The
Iranian engineer in Belgium.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Keshe's work. In fact, I've received that question numerous times at this conference here. So M.T. Keshe is an Iranian scientist who lives in Belgium, and he's been for a number of years making claims of having some very high-gain disruptive technologies, including energy, anti-gravity, water generation, water purification. And for many years, there's been a lot of bold proclamations that have come from him, and more recently, sending out some blueprints for how to build some small prototype devices, and apparently even having some of these for sale. And that's caused a lot of enthusiasm. And I've received that question from a number of people asking, is this real? Is this important? And what I have not met him, and I have no real, I don't have a strong opinion either way. I'm more like, let's wait and see, all right, whether this proves out. I really hope he has something that's real. Now, I would say that the two Dutch men who I mentioned yesterday, Jeroen van Straten and Robert Dupper, both who live in the Netherlands, and then Kesh being in Belgium, they had extended the invitation to him multiple times to come and demonstrate to them and to a team that would be able to verify the technology, or let them come to his facility. And not only did he turn them down, but he apparently was quite inhospitable. That's probably the gentle language to use. And, you know, and these would have been the big flag wavers, you know, that if it showed to be what he's claiming it to be, they'd be like, hey, we're going to help you announce this to the world. We will be your biggest advocates. And I would be, too, and all of our organizations would be. But for some weird reason, he didn't accept that invitation, which always kind of makes me wonder, okay, what's up with that? So, but again, I hope it's real. Time will tell. Okay, so there's some new energy conferences that are really very, very good. This one here is actually a combination conference, the Extraordinary Technology and the Conference on Future Energy. Those are held in Albuquerque, usually at the end of July, and really good. Okay, so that's all the left brain stuff, all right? Lots of information available for people who want to know. It's this other thing here, what I call the right brain list, that to me really is more foundational than all of that other stuff. This is the part that's been missing. I showed you the list of all of these inventors who now appear in our books as dead inventors who had great ideas, and those ideas have been lost to the world, all right? Why were they given information from some higher order intelligence, but yet it never made it out into the public domain to create a social and environmental benefit? I believe it's because of what we're going to talk about now. And to me, this is the more important juice. This is the real juice of the new paradigm here. So I want to talk about these things, you know, dispelling fear, seeing from the heart, one family, sharing humankind, an appeal for wisdom, visioning, music, and art. What do these have anything to do with breakthrough energy technology? Why is this science guy even spending time talking about this? Well, there is a very strong spiritual component to whether any of this stuff makes it out and has a benefit, all right? And Einstein was a pretty bright guy. You know, some of the things he had to say were worth listening to. And, you know, yesterday on the panel session, there was this question from George Norrie last night. He says, hey, do you guys look over your shoulder? You ever worry about that? And there were various responses to that. And, you know, I think my response was, hey, look, you know, there are a lot of interests on this planet that are doing distorted things from a place of distortion. It's a place of fear. They're afraid, okay? And when people are afraid, you know what happens is there's a defense that happens. And usually, in a lot of cases, if they're not running away in fear, they're going into attack mode. All right? And we all know what that's like. We can identify with that. And we just have to look at it clearly. That's what it is. All right? The fear propagators, the porn fear, or fear porn, that's everywhere we look, and it just sucks our energy away. It's all coming from a place of fear by those who propagate it. All right? And so we've all been there. We all can identify with that. But there's another way of looking at it here. All right? We can choose to look at that fear simply as a call for love. That changes everything. That changes everything. Because when someone's doing something that in their own eyes is an attack, but yet we don't perceive it as an attack, we simply perceive it as, well, there's a distortion in their thinking. And really what they're doing is they're feeling the absence of love. That's something we can choose to provide. The recipe's very, very simple, but so seldom practiced, but it works. It works. I've seen it so many times. It works. So, there's talk about them. Well, them, Mr. Global, bad guys, if they're bad guys, got to be good guys. And of course, that's us, right? We're all the good guys. Well, is that really true? Is that really true? I'm not so sure, because are we all completely innocent? Have none of us ever felt the fear and protected our own perceived vested interests? I know I have. I know I have. All right? Maybe some of you have too. So the distinction between good guy and bad guy maybe isn't so clear. All right? So maybe we can be, a little compassionate toward, all right, when these people in very highly leveraged positions are using tools of manipulation that seem way beyond what we have available if we chose to exercise manipulative tools, at least we can understand the fundamental emotions and the fundamental thought patterns that is stimulating the manipulation. It's fear, okay? So we've all been there, but, what if we chose to embrace them as brothers and sisters, to really look at us as one family? And how many of us within our own families have had so much strife, so much division? It's like, and even the family's ripped apart. That's happened within my own family. And it becomes maybe the most primal challenge for any of us relationally is how do we heal what goes on in these relationships that are of our own blood? All right? But there's vast lessons in all of that if we approach it right. And we can apply that to this global stage where the stakes are very high for a whole planet. All right? So I invite anyone who is in the Mr. Global crowd to sit down and have a cup of coffee or a glass of whiskey with me or a sandwich. And let's talk about this. Let's not, put labels on things so much. But let's get to the heart of the matter as far as what do we really want to see happen here? And let's stop making one guy or one group the enemy. I don't have enemies because I don't see anybody like that. I don't see enemies. Even if they may see it, I'm not choosing that, all right? I'm choosing to see, here's a brother or a sister, and I'm going to embrace them that way. They're responsible how they think, but I'm choosing how I think about it. But it gives the space for healing these things. So imagine if you had any individual who's in a highly leveraged position to cause and propagate manipulation, and you were to stimulate a change of heart in them simply because you were willing to look at them with different eyes. There's a biblical reference to one individual early in the first century who supposedly was a persecutor of humans, had a transforming experience, and became a great evangelist of love. And profound things can happen when someone's heart is changed. And everything says that didn't just happen historically. That can happen now and does happen all the time. So why not give it a chance and embrace one of these people who may have done great damage and give them the opportunity to bring great correction? That's how I think some miraculous things can happen. So we seem to live on a planet where there's not enough to go around, right? Especially with this swelling population and so many people experiencing lack. Do we have to have continuous conflict out of that? Maybe not. As I said yesterday, we don't normally talk about these energy technologies as free energy because there is a cost, at least in economic monetary terms, to having a technology, right? Because it's comprised of materials and there's been work and effort and all that is part of it. But the concept of free energy is still valid, all right? And that idea, that concept of free energy, and it would enhance freedom. It would unleash creativity in such a way that untold of beautiful and wonderful things could happen on this planet. If people were no longer enslaved economically and had their time drained away to simply create a just base survival, all right? And they could use that time to apply their incredible potential for creative solutions. We just can't even comprehend what this planet would look like. But it would be far different than what it is right now. So just imagine us sharing. And the same thing we teach our children. Foster had the things up there, don't hit, don't steal each other's stuff, that kind of thing. That's what we teach our children, and we teach them to share, right? Share. But do we do that? Do we model that? The global economic model doesn't. But we can change that, as Catherine has pointed out. There's a temptation in free energy as well. And it's something that those who are very close to this have experienced. And we've seen that there's a temptation for egos to assert themselves and to cause these relational divisions. And I've seen organizations that should have been so highly effective in making this movement happen earlier than now, much earlier than now. They were derailed because of the ego problems. And even within New Energy Movement itself, within the first couple years of its establishment, back in 2003, those first 2 years, it was nearly ripped apart by this same problem. And it was very, very difficult to hold it together. But what did hold it together was a vision that, hey, if we can't get our act together, how can we possibly expect a world to do it? We gotta live up to the things that we're saying are the solutions. If we're not practicing it ourselves, we're a bunch of hypocrites. Let's get it together. All right? So we kind of humbly dragged ourselves back on mission. And the reminder has always been to be vigilant of this. The temptations for the distortion of gold fever, all right? And the inventors have this oftentimes. I see that very fracturing, very distorting, and it derails so much. Or to be the expert in this. I'm not an expert in this. But when people introduce me as an expert in this, I'm not an expert in this. I'm simply someone who's been asked to show up. And that's all there is to it. There's so much of this. I probably am aware of a single digits percentage of what's out there in the way of technology. All right? I'm not an expert in this. But I have chosen to research and connect and to show up with a sincere interest to move this forward. And I invite everybody to do that. And by the way, we don't want any single individual or any small group of individuals to be the leaders of this. What we want is for there just to be a mass embrace of these things that could solve complex global problems. Practically, it's easy to cut off a head, right? It's easy to cut off a few heads. You can't cut off everybody's head,
So how does it happen that if we don't want a single group or entity to become significant, that isn't exactly the way you phrased it, and yet we want to snap the fingers of mass of people?
Well, it doesn't happen to have that mass, the mass embrace of this. It doesn't happen overnight. I mean, there's 300 people at this conference, let's say, rather than 3 billion. But it starts like that. We all have a sphere of influence. Some of us have brought families or friends, hopefully someone new who wasn't just part of the choir. I know Jordan Pease, he was talking to me, Jordan's the producer of the conference. He and I talked about this very, very closely about how do we bring in the audience of people who are totally unfamiliar with any of this and who would think we're a bunch of kooks, okay? We really wanted to figure out a way of how to tap that audience. And now we knew that hey, one of the things that happens with a conference like this is we all get recharged by seeing, by the fellowship of coming together with other people who want to be the change agents of a new paradigm. And it's very important that we have fellowship. I crave it because a lot of times I feel like I'm out alone, kind of in the desert and all that kind of thing. So when I come together with a group like this, it's like, oh, my batteries get recharged and I'm just bathing in this hopeful, optimistic energy. There's just this passion that's going on. That's very important. But we really, hope that, well, maybe each person brings a few who might be hard skeptics, who might be totally unexposed, but are willing to be vulnerable to something that actually makes sense. Oh, if you're unfamiliar with any of this and all of a sudden you hear a Catherine Austin Fitts lecture, it's like, holy cow, what was that? But that something real happened. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just thinking that could happen if this was like a quarterly event.
Mm-hmm.
It will happen sort of eventually. It would have to happen over and over. Because
Yeah.
we like to attract clients.
This is being planned to be a series. The architects of the new paradigm are planned to be a series that'll move from place to place. So that was part of Jordan's original vision. I think it's a good one. And this was kind of the beta trial, right? See what the response was and get feedback, see how we can do this in ever more effective ways to bring in other citizens who are curious, but who have been unexposed to this. Because I think that, there's been great articulation of what some of the issues and certainly some of the solutions are here. So, even though there's these temptations for fractures as the egos get stroked in this whole thing, and we tend to get off track. We can remember that, hey, being kind to each other, same thing that we teach our children again. It's these basic lessons that pull us back, and it's easy in a group like this where smiles return smiles. There are other places where smiles. If I go to an academic conference where it's filled with scientists who believe that everything they've been taught in the textbook and how they got their PhD and all that's, they're the experts, and then I start talking about this stuff, a smile is not necessarily returned for a smile. I'm going to tell you something very interesting. How many of you are familiar with something called 350.org? Okay? 350.org has the banner of being the most widely recognized organization that is combating global climate change, global warming. It's headed by Bill McKibben, who many describe as the planet's leading ecologist. I had a chance to attend a conference in Toronto it was in December. And Bill was the closing keynote speaker at that conference. And I had never met him. I was certainly familiar with who he was. And I was in this room filled with kind of the Canadian who's who of people who were doing, ground level work on at the municipal level as far as what the impacts of climate change mean to Canada. Flooding, all of the engineering, the infrastructure, insurance companies, banks, you name it. And a lot of environmental people there, environmental scientists and all that. And they were hanging on Bill's every word at this conference. And there's hundreds of people in this room. And it came to the end of his presentation, and 2 people asked a question. And I was one of those. And I stood up and I said, I appreciate your wonderful presentation. I said, you know, I noticed that when you're talking about the renewable energy portion of helping to address climate change, you appropriately mentioned wind and solar, but there is so much that you left out. I said, are you aware that there are many very promising, very high power density technologies that, if given a little bit of support, could be total game changers in all of this? And also that many of these technologies have been developed in black budget programs, and the energy technologies themselves have been applied to advanced propulsion technologies that can take us to the stars. And I'd like to extend the invitation to you to not just have to believe my words, but where I can take you somewhere and have you witness it yourself. Would you accept such an invitation? And I'm standing up in front of 300 people, and there's Bill McKibben on the stage. And he says, well, they're doing great things in Germany with solar, and wind is a really great source of energy. Are there any other questions? So talk about cognitive dissonance or diversion or whatever. And you know what? I expected that would probably be the response, because I've seen it before, you know, under similar circumstances with others who were the experts and supposedly the leader and supposedly the call it whatever, all right? And then I had, the conference ended at that point. And I was kind of like getting my stuff together, and I'm out in the lobby getting ready to leave, and just checking out. And I noticed, here comes Bill, and he walks out into the front of the hotel, and clearly was like, it kind of looked like, well, someone was to take him to the airport, and or he was waiting for a taxi. Clearly was kind of nervous, like, okay, who's, you know, where are they? And so I went out and went up to him, and I said, hi, Bill, and went to shake his hand. He's like, oh yeah, you're the guy. Yeah. He goes, well, give me your card, and I'll contact you. And I said, well, would you like a ride to the airport? I have a car here. And he's like, oh, no. And he immediately just like gets on his phone and walks away. Talk about an incredible opportunity for like a one-on-one to like, you know, well, you said something very interesting. Could you speak more? And I was offering him a 1-hour opportunity, right? And he literally just picks up his cell phone and just walks away.
Any possibility he was read in on it and told not to talk to you?
Who's to know? But it was curious, all right? Does that mean he hasn't done good work or anything like that? No, it doesn't mean anything like that. But what it does mean is that there is an entrainment of some sort in this. It does mean that there's a vested interest of some sort in having a message that is truncated, that only allows a conversation of narrow bandwidth rather than having the whole conversation. So it was curious, and I have no judgment of him, all right? And I would even say this, as I was feeling it rising up in me, some feeling of grievance toward him, This is the ego getting charged up now. I have a forgiveness ritual that I go through at the end of the day, all right? And I did it to hold him in mind, and it's gone. And I was even debating about whether I would even bring it up here, because it could potentially result in a judgment. And that's not what I'm calling for here. I'm simply using it as an example of how things aren't always as they appear to be. And even those who we hear about or may have recognized as leaders, be careful on putting leader or expert labels. The best way to assert leadership is to take it on yourself, all right? That's... Excuse me?
Is there any technology out there a person can have personally to block entrainment or whatever that is?
Okay, great question. Yes, the question was, is there a technology that helps people to block entrainment? And if you were listening to Catherine's talk in here, I don't know if that exact question came about, is there a technology to block it? But I'll tell you what she said, what I heard her say was, she goes to the well of spiritual power to get her through it. That is the armor that she puts on. And being out in nature, exactly, going on the digital diet and all that kind of thing. Makes sense. Now, I would say this. I do that same thing in my way, of course, and that is the armor. And I'll tell you, our fields are extremely powerful. Our bioelectric field and the field that comes from our directed thought is incredibly powerful. And it goes beyond the technologies they're using, because our thoughts are not contained in space-time. They go beyond that. They're more powerful. More powerful. So using your own resources of spirit, and it's available to all of us. It's the best way. I can't speak of the technological tools that might be available. I imagine they exist. I don't know what they are. I know what works for me. And I'm sure many others who are more experienced in that, I would say probably, if you ask Kimberly, she'd say going into meditation and all that helps too. I agree that anything that helps us to keep the distorting energies at bay, that tend to disorganize our thoughts, get us agitated and all that. Any practices we have that get us in that space help. There's a company, an Irish company called Steorn, spelled Steorn. They have some small devices based on a technology platform they call Orbo, and it's based on some magnetic principles, and it does show a mild over-unity effect for the small devices they have right now. And that's real. It's commercial. It's real. It's been validated. And again, it shows that there are, some of these things making their way out there. Now, to me, those things are important, but they're more of a novelty at this point, because where I want to move toward is having some real energy-generating things that can move us along from an environment that's been heavily degraded, and where the trajectory is in the wrong direction, and start to bring correction to that. So that means that you really have to have scalable, high power density technologies that are doing this. But I'm glad you brought it up, because I think it's notable.
Are there any others on the market besides Orbo?
There is another technology that's being marketed in Europe by a company called Roche, Rosch. They also have a distributor called Gaia, and they are using, I believe it's a German company, but they have an interesting technology that is using principles of buoyancy and gravity, coupled with a proprietary generator design where they are producing excess electrical output from their device. And that's been fairly recent, but that's another introduction. Yes?
Are you familiar at all with this new breakthrough energy coalition that Gates is trying to organize?
Okay, good question. What is this Breakthrough Energy Coalition that Bill Gates announced at the Paris climate talks? All right, I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you remember the opening day of the Paris climate talks on this, it was a particular Monday just several weeks ago, the photo image that was put on every newspaper, every magazine cover, all over the internet was essentially, the G7 leaders, Obama and the Chinese premier, but front and center, Bill Gates, all right? And Bill Gates is announcing the Breakthrough Energy Coalition. Curious, all right? And he's doing it supposedly in concert with the Billionaire Boys Club. Zuckerberg, Facebook, Soros, Branson, you name it, all the household name billionaires supposedly are all part of this Breakthrough Energy Coalition. And Catherine sends me this email, with that picture. And she's like, the caption she had under it was, "Oh, how curious, the sovereign nation of Microsoft shows up at the Paris climate talks." And I thought, oh, that's good. I ought to have that in my presentation here. But when I went to the website, well, I would say the first thing I got, immediately I got email back from my two Dutch brothers, Jeroen van Straten and Robert Dupper, who sent a response to what Catherine had sent. And it's like, oh man, is this not a co-option of the Breakthrough Energy Movement, their actual name in Holland? And Gates is calling his thing the Breakthrough Energy Coalition. I mean, it certainly feels like a co-option, so we were immediately suspicious. So I go onto their website, actually, even a week after it had been announced, maybe even later, after it had been announced, go on their website. It's very, very kind of basic. And, on the link that says contact us, I thought, well, I'll contact them. Click on the button. Click on the button. Nothing happens. It's dead. Now, how is it that the Billionaire Boys Club can set up something that's, embracing disruptive energy technology to save the world, and they've got all the resources in the world to put up a website, and yet the contact us button doesn't work? Now, is that not a hurry-up effort of some sort? What's up with that? I'm just going to leave it at that right now.
Are there any healing technologies that are breakthrough, kind of new, and how close are we to seeing them?
Are there any new energy technologies that are healing technologies as well that are available, and how soon will we see them? Yes. In fact, that conference that I mentioned, I'm going to go back. Well, I'll tell you what. I mentioned a conference called the Conference on Future Energy in Albuquerque at the end of July. It's every July. At that conference, Dr. Thomas Vallone and his wife, Jackie Vallone, they integrate both the energy side and the healing technology side, electromagnetic healing technologies, and Jackie Vallone is an expert in that. Okay, and they're based out of Washington, out of the Washington, D.C. area. They live in Maryland. And so they always talk about that. They always have that as topics in that. Great question, by the way, because that is one of the other implications all of Valone. That's how you spell Valone. Okay. So this one here, technology always shows up ahead of the wisdom needed to use it wisely. Certainly we've experienced that, right? Nuclear, think of the nuclear age. What happened? Well, we learned how to blow up cities. We learned how to cause a waste issue of things that are toxically polluting, require tens of thousands of years for that waste to remediate itself because of all these high-energy neutrons that shoot off of it and fry you. We've got rivers like the Columbia River, where I live downstream of, that are having toxic plumes coming from the Hanford Reservation. We've got Fukushima now polluting the Pacific Ocean, all this kind of thing. So clearly we adopted a technology well in advance of the wisdom to use it correctly. Now, is that going to happen with these type of technologies as well? Well, the potential certainly exists. What is very safe to say is that they're already being used in black budget operations. Black budget operations is largely what you've been hearing Richard Dolan speak of, Catherine Austin Fitz speak of. It is the direction of public funding and illicit funds that come from perhaps the drug trade, the human trafficking trades, these things, where those funds are directed into secret programs that largely are military-oriented, secret corporate alliances with that, and that they are being used for purposes that are not aligned with life. That's the gentle way of saying it. In fact, generally they're being used for evil. How about that? Okay. So, yeah. Yes, radiation.
I've heard that cold fusion, osmic Patterson cell, or other types of cold or LENR can help reduce radiation in the environment. Now, are you aware of any of that type of technology or any other technology that will reduce radiation quicker than the
Okay. Yeah, so the question is about, do any of these new energy technologies have applications to remediate radiation? Absolutely. In fact, many of them do. And several of those have been proposed to the Department of Energy, which manages all of our nuclear power plants. Those have been proposed and soundly kicked out of the room. And in certain cases where the inventor felt a heavy hand upon their head. Okay? When you look at how nuclear waste is handled right now, it's not remediated. What it is it's generally just contained and buried, and it guarantees nothing. Hanford's a great example of that. And so just looking for a nuclear repository, there is no absolutely fail-safe guarantee that that's the result. Many of these technologies that you'll hear about as plasma-based have the ability to remediate nuclear waste. How do you do that? You actually cause a nuclear transmutation, taking a radioactive isotope, changing it into a non-radioactive isotope, or into an actual different element. Well, the question was, is that like what happens in a volcano where you have material coming up and it's changing form, in essence? Reforming. It's actually different. This is actually a nuclear process that is changing the number of neutrons at the nucleus itself to make it a non-radioactive isotope. Yeah. I can tell you this, there are nuclear transmutations that happen inside biological organisms, including our bodies, including in chickens, including in bacteria, and every lightning storm, that's a big plasma arc. Every bolt of lightning is a big plasma arc. There are nuclear transmutations happening. And it's very common, it's incredibly common. In so many of these new energy technologies that are using a plasma, which kind of, if you look up the definition of plasma, it means hot ionized gas. That's essentially what's going on there. And it has very unique properties. But what almost invariably happens is when you are creating a plasma around some type of electrode and you measure what the constituents of the metal are before you generate the plasma and after you generate the plasma, there are new and different metals there. That means nuclear transmutation has happened. And it's very easy to prove. So the fact that that's happening kind of is in defiance of a lot of kind of conventional nuclear physics understanding, where you have to have these incredible temperatures and pressures and all this to cause these type of reactions. But it's so overwhelmingly common and could be brought to bear on nuclear remediation. And it has been proposed for the Fukushima to address that. But again, yeah, I mean, there are cold fusion processes that are plasma-based as well. So,
High pressure, high temperature for making diamonds, and now they've been able to make diamonds with low pressure, low temperature transmutation.
yeah, so yeah, this becomes the ability to transmute elements, starts to get us to the Star Trek replicator type of concept here, where we can make every material that we need. So again, there would the whole thing about rare earth elements, it kind of goes away. It's just like, it's just another element. It's not rare anymore because we can actually make it.
Joel, I want you to answer this question in two ways. You know, how you feel right brain and how you feel left brain. Are you aware of any technology, and I extend what he's saying, that can remotely affect our biology, in other words, individuals being targeted, or affect our thought process?
Okay, so the question is, am I familiar with any technology that can be used remotely to affect our biology or our thought processes? Yes, absolutely. There are directed beam technologies that can do that. There are technologies that can produce.
RHIC, EDOM.
Yeah, which are acronyms for various types of energetic technologies. I can tell you, I've directly had experience of certain things that I believe were, let's say, a different way of ringing my doorbell. But it was like right here and jolted me bolt upright in my bed because it was so intensely disruptive to my own brain. And it's like, okay, I get it. But again, being in fear of these things is not why we're here. All right? Let me just kind of wrap up a couple things here, and then we'll take a couple more questions. And you'll be the first, okay? So, even though the technology that always comes in advance of the wisdom to use it wisely, we can make the appeal to consider in advance, what would we do with this? How do we make sure that we use this peacefully, that it's only used in ways that are aligned with life, instead of used for manipulation of life? And this is a very heady part of this whole thing. And it requires a very mature look at this, and planning, and getting the populace engaged. Not the way the whole chemtrail program is, right? Which feels like a big experiment and hidden in plain sight, all right? I could go into that. I've had a lot of deep personal experience on that whole chemtrail thing since its start in the late 90s, okay? But we have to get the populace engaged in these discussions about how to use these things wisely. These technologies, very high power density, very attractive potentially to be used in weaponized applications. So what about that? Can we prevent that? Well, what did our ancestors going back hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of years, when they saw this fire? I can make fire, all right? What did they likely do with that after they learned that, okay, I can have warmth, I can keep the animals at bay, I can cook my mastodon on it? You can bet that probably one of the first things they did with it is they learned they could burn down the other guy's hut. Yep. So it's interesting. Can we prevent these things from being used for evil and destructive purposes? Well, only, again, if we have the conversation, all right? And, it's human nature is a funny thing, right? But I do think that the technologies are coming anyway. They are coming. We have to be prepared, all right? And we have to lead. We can't just let other people make the decisions for us on this, because unless they're coming from a very consciously grounded place to align these things with life, we know likely the opposite's going to happen. That's predictable, right? Okay, so we have to lead on this, and that means that in our calling out, we have to call for an evolution, not just in the energy technology, but also in human consciousness. It's a huge part of this whole thing, all right? It's why I said at the beginning of this that all of this is more important than the nuts and bolts stuff I was talking about yesterday. This is really where the rubber meets the road, okay? So people may think because I'm engaged in all of this stuff that I think that this is the answer to it all. And I'll tell you what, it's not. It's absolutely not. The technology is not our savior. The best that it is a bridge. It's a bridge for us as a civilization in much the similar way that someone who has a broken leg uses a pair of crutches to help speed the healing of that leg, all right? But the idea isn't to keep the crutch. Once you no longer need it, you discard it, all right? And hopefully you've achieved a new level of health. I firmly believe that we inherently have the capacity to use the power of our minds to heat and light a room, to transport us across distances. I believe that has been demonstrated by certain humans who had advanced understanding of this, some who are alive at this time. And I believe that that's going to become an increasingly common experience. But in the meantime, we're in this very dangerous transition period. And we need the technologies as a bridge. Now, is that a bridge for decades or centuries or millennia? I'm not sure. But it is a bridge. But I can tell you one thing, the technology itself is not a savior. The savior is the source that animates us, the love that is the foundation of doing all this in a way that's aligned with life. That's the source, that's the savior here. It's not the technology, but it can teach us to use the technology properly while we need it. And right now, we know we're in challenging times. It's hard to keep ourselves balanced, but we need to remain vigilant against those distorting impulses. And Kimberly said it so well yesterday in her talk. What a beautiful, heart-centered talk. What's my purpose here? That's how you come back to square when you start to feel that you've strayed. What is my purpose here? And I say this multiple times a day to myself when I get a little confused about it. My purpose here is healing. My purpose here is healing. All of this, any message I've given on any of this, it's all about that, period. It's not just about energy technologies or remediation of planets and all that. It's about how do we make this world a more beautiful place, because people have come into relationships that are aligned with life. And we do that, all the other stuff will fall under order, fall under our order, a higher order. And it's an amazing thing, and it's coming. It's coming. We are going to do that, but we're going to choose it freely. And it's going to be such an incredible experience for all of us. Really excited about this. And it means that we're going to have the chance to have that world that is as beautiful as our visions are bold. We can't possibly anticipate what it's all going to look like, right? But it will exceed our expectations, because the creativity of each of us is vast and it's powerful. So we can transform this world. And it's happening already. There's many ways for us each to get involved in that. And, you know, I welcome you to investigate New Energy Movement and these other things that are going on with the other presenters on how to personally get involved in that. And last, I'd like to acknowledge that the music and art, those communities and those endeavors that uplift us are very, very powerful in communicating the message. And all the art you saw here was courtesy of a very dear friend of mine, Sean Galloway, who also wrote the theme song for New Energy Movement. And he's a great guy, a dear brother. So thank you, Sean. And I thank all of you here. I really appreciate you being here, for showing up. And I also want to let you know, I prayed for every one of you this morning. Thank you.